I think that we have 5 core human desires or human needs. I'm going to list them for you first, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. One is to be seen for who we are, below the personality, below the conditioning, at our core essence. We have a deep need to be seen. We have a need to be loved and to love. This one is fairly obvious. But again, to be loved for who we are and not for our money, our career, our body, things like that. Number 3 is to feel that our existence matters to others. In other words, nobody would just not notice if we were not here the next day, that our existence matters. And that's just for who we are. Again, not for anything else. In other words, we're loved and we're making a difference in some way just by being here. The next is to feel that our work has meaning, our life work has meaning. Not everybody gets to enjoy this. Some people have jobs permanently that they don't really feel are meaningful, but we have a need for this that unfortunately not everybody experiences. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And number 5 is to be fulfilled spiritually. This desire often comes later in life. It usually doesn't come to young people, although it does for some. But others don't really start questioning life until they've had some sort of tragedy, like a parent, you're a child and a parent dies, then you start thinking about death. Or you're 20 and your child passes away, then you really start questioning, well, what happens? Now it becomes an urgent question as opposed to something you cannot think about. So going back to number 1, that to be seen is really connected to what we've been doing in here. We need to be seen for who we are in spite of the armor that we wear to protect ourselves, in spite of diversionary tactics that we use so people actually don't see us. Many of us don't feel that we have value deep inside, and so we try to create value for. I'll create an example of, let's say, I'm sure you've seen someone who wears tons of jewelry, dripping with jewelry, because they don't feel that they have value, so they want to think, well, I'm very wealthy, therefore I have value. Because without this, they might not think they have value at all. There are so many variations of this. That's just one of 100. We need to be not only seen by our loved ones, but by our tribe. And we also need to feel like our shame can be witnessed by our tribe. Things that we feel broken, the parts of us that are broken or that we feel are broken, we don't like to reveal to people, whether it's psychological or health issues. It's very difficult to meet someone and say, oh, by the way, I have cancer. It's not something that usually is thought of as a binding, friendship-making sort of conversation. And so we tend to feel, involuntarily, we feel a shame, a kind of shame, for these areas that we can consider broken or weak, or things that bring us to our knees and make us feel helpless. But what you've seen is, today, especially this morning, is when you reveal some of this to the tribe and they don't run from you, but they accept you and hang on to you. It's deeply meaningful to us because we don't often get to experience this on any level. The cost of not having this, to not feel seen, can cause us to feel deeply lonely and to take actions to draw attention to ourselves. Maybe you've had a friend who's extremely funny. I grew up with one, my best friend, my only friend in the neighborhood, really, because there weren't very many of us. It was like growing up with Bill Murray. It was like growing up with, imagine Bill Murray as a child, that's who I grew up with. And it's difficult. With people like that, they're really funny, but at some point you wish they would stop. But they use it as a way to keep you at arm's distance. It's like, I use my humor to make you like me, but not too close. I use my money to make you like me, or my looks to make you like me, or my intellect to make you like me, but not too close. We can tend to start creating things like this to attract people, or people seeking fame. That's a really big one. And it also can create, if we don't feel seen, tremendous self-loathing. Loathing is just another word for hate, self-hate. Self-loathing. And that leads to self-destructive behavior like addictions or worse. The next one, to love and to be loved, is obvious, I think, because we seek it and we talk about it and we sing about it. We have so many songs about it, plays and movies about it. We have the desire to love and be loved by our tribe, by our family, by our significant other, if we have a significant other. And these are different types of love, but we crave all of them. The cost of not having them, once again, is loneliness. How real is loneliness? How devastating is loneliness? Well, the UK just created a ministry of loneliness. Raise your hand if you knew that before I told you. It's amazing because government creating a new ministry is a big deal. Well, the UK government created 2 ministries in the last year and a half. One for loneliness and one for suicide prevention. And that's because they did the biggest health survey they've done in the history of the nation and discovered that a full 1/3 of people they interviewed considered taking their own life. And that people are tremendously lonely. And especially the millennial generation is now the loneliest. So they've created 2 ministries in the hope of dealing with this. Of course, the Brexit stuff, I guess, has overshadowed this in the news. But of course, if we do not feel love, besides loneliness, it can also make us feel hopeless, isolated, deeply depressed, and so on. The next one is interesting, to feel that our existence matters. We can feel that even if we don't feel a love relationship. So, for example, I'll use a school teacher. School teachers can have very meaningful impacts on students, and the teacher can know it sometimes. And the student and the teacher don't love each other. Sometimes the impact is because of teaching. That would fall into their vocation matters. But sometimes it's not the vocation, it's their presence or their way of talking to them. There was a teacher that I knew in my high school. High school in America, in case you don't know, is like 14 to 18 years old. And every year she was voted the most popular teacher. And she taught U.S. government and U.S. history. And these are not popular subjects amongst teenagers, in case you didn't know that. Maybe you remember, 16, were you interested in history and government? So if you were to make some sweeping assumptions about this lady, you might think, well, she must have been very charismatic. Yeah, she wasn't. Well, she must have been very funny then, entertaining. No, she wasn't. She must have been very beautiful. No, she wasn't. None of the obvious stuff. So why would she be voted most popular teacher? Because she had a way of raising the self-esteem of her students by the way she spoke to them. Especially individually, she would take people aside, kids aside who had low self-esteem and doing poorly with their grades, and by talking to them would raise their self-esteem, and they would suddenly start getting better grades. This was her gift. It had nothing to do with teaching history or U.S. government. Every year, most popular teacher. So I just combined 2 into 1. Our existence has meaning, our life work has meaning. And finally, to be fulfilled in some way, to have some understanding spiritually. And this is, of course, the hardest one. We want to know that when our body dies, we don't. We want to know, or some of us don't want to know. Because logically we think, no, it's not possible there, let's just not talk about it. But of course, at some point, unless you die suddenly, you have to talk about it. You have to think about it at least. You have to decide what actions to take. Most people postpone this as long as possible. But again, once you lose someone really close to you, that's when you really start thinking about these things. Is there a plan? Is there a divine system of some sort? Is there an algorithm to this? Is there a matrix? Is this all an illusion and there's a different reality? Do we live hundreds of thousands of times or only once? Etc. And so we start reading about these things and maybe going to lectures, going on YouTube. I would venture to say many, many people are spiritually seekers, but not so many finders. And that seems to be the crux of our journey here. The ones, of course, who seem to be the most certain usually have not looked very far. They have adopted a way of thinking from their parents or from their tribe and ceased to question anything outside that, and in fact will be hostile to any alternative ideas. That's different. Now, the cost of not having an understanding, of course, spiritually, is extremely high because it gives us great fear. A fear of not existing. This is the greatest fear, isn't it? Ultimately. Fear of our loved ones not existing anymore. So that's why the need, the core need and desire to be fulfilled or have some understanding spiritually is so high.